Some parents are the life of every party, the ones everyone loves being around. But what happens when you go home with that person? That gap between who they are in public and who they are in private is exactly what we're exploring today. I'm Jhonna, and welcome back to Jhonna Unfiltered. We're continuing the series on MBTI types as narcissistic parents, and today we're looking at ESTP, also known as the entrepreneur type. This is one of the most interesting to talk about because this parent tends to look, from the outside, like one of the best parents around. Before I get into it, the usual disclaimer. I'm not a psychologist or a therapist. Nothing in this video is a clinical diagnosis. This is my learning diary, based on research, patterns, and observation. Most ESTPs are genuinely fun, adaptable, and capable people who bring real energy and resilience into family life. This video is specifically about what happens when narcissistic patterns overlay that personality style. If you identify as ESTP, please don't take this as a description of who you are. Take it as a description of one possible way things can go wrong. Now let me explain what ESTP actually means for anyone who hasn't followed the full series. ESTP stands for extroverted, sensing, thinking, and perceiving. People of this type are typically described as bold, energetic, and action-oriented. They're the ones who can walk into any room and immediately feel comfortable. They're quick thinkers who deal with problems in real time rather than overthinking them in advance. They're usually socially magnetic, often funny, and genuinely exciting to be around. A healthy ESTP parent can be remarkable. They raise kids who know how to handle themselves, who aren't afraid of challenges, and who have a natural confidence that comes from being encouraged to engage with the real world rather than being overprotected from it. But when narcissistic patterns enter the picture, that same energy becomes something very different. The fun becomes performance. The confidence becomes dominance. And the child, who might have benefited enormously from a healthy version of this parent, ends up in an environment where they're expected to entertain, perform, and reflect well on someone who's essentially running their family, like a stage for their own life. Let me explain the core pattern. The ESTP narcissistic parent is deeply invested in how things look, not just in how the family looks to others, though that matters enormously to them, but in the physical, visible, moment-to-moment reality of life. This is a type that lives very much in the present. They're energized by what's happening right now. And in a narcissistic version, that means their needs, their mood, their current desire for stimulation or admiration consistently take priority over the slower, quieter, more internal needs of the child. They also tend to evaluate people, including their own children, based on visible performance. Are you winning? Are you impressive? Do you make this family look good? If yes, you get warmth, attention, generosity. If no, or if you're struggling in some way that isn't interesting or useful to them, you become invisible. Or worse, an irritation. Let me talk about the mother and father versions separately. The ESTP narcissistic mother tends to be very socially oriented and appearance-focused. She's often described by people outside the family as vibrant, fun, and generous. She might be the mother who throws the best parties, who's always stylishly put together, who everyone finds easy to like. But the child at home sees a different version. Someone whose moods change quickly. Someone who can be generous one day and critical the next. Someone who cares enormously about how the family looks to the outside world and has very little patience for the parts of parenting that aren't visible or entertaining. She may also have a competitive quality toward her own children, particularly daughters. As the daughter grows and starts attracting her own attention, the mother can feel subtly threatened. She might make small undermining comments framed as observations or jokes. She might redirect attention back to herself in social situations where the child was being noticed. And she'll usually deny that this is what's happening because in her own mind, she's just being honest or funny. When the child is struggling emotionally, this mother's response tends to be impatience. She doesn't do heavy emotions well. They make her uncomfortable. She might tell the child to toughen up, to stop overthinking, to get over it and move on. Not because she wants to be cruel, but because emotional depth feels like unnecessary complication to someone who lives in the moment and values action over reflection. The ESTP narcissistic father is often the most physically and socially dominant presence in the family. He carries himself with the confidence of someone who expects to be respected without having to ask for it. And in many ways, that confidence is genuinely impressive. But in a narcissistic version of this parent, that confidence tips into something more like a constant need to be the strongest, the most capable, the most impressive person in any room he's in, including rooms with his own children. He may compete with his own children as they grow, particularly sons. When the child accomplishes something, instead of celebrating it simply, the father can't help adding a qualifier. That's decent. But when I was your age. Or, you could have done it better if you'd listened to me. He can't let the child have an uncomplicated win, because an uncomplicated win for the child feels like it reflects something about him. He also tends to have very little tolerance for vulnerability in the family. Emotions, especially sadness or fear, feel like weakness to him. And weakness in his children feels like a personal embarrassment. So the child learns very quickly that showing their real emotional state around this parent isn't safe. They learn to be tough, or at least to perform toughness, while whatever is actually happening inside stays carefully hidden. He's often unpredictable in terms of financial behavior. This type loves stimulation and risk, and when narcissistic patterns are present, those tendencies can lead to impulsive financial decisions that affect the whole family. The child grows up in an environment where stability feels like a luxury, where things can change quickly based on the parent's latest interest or impulse. Let me look at how financial situation shapes this dynamic. A wealthy ESTP narcissistic parent uses money as a way of expressing love and maintaining control at the same time. They're generous, genuinely. They buy things, create experiences, make sure the family has access to good things. But every act of generosity is also a reminder. I gave you this. You owe me loyalty, admiration, compliance. The minute the child makes an independent choice that the parent didn't approve or didn't benefit from, the generosity can be referenced as leverage. A financially struggling ESTP narcissistic parent shifts the narrative toward all the big things they were going to do and couldn't, often framing the family, or the child, as part of what held them back. There's always a business idea that would have worked, an opportunity that got away, a life that could have been, if things had been different. And the child absorbs some of the weight of that narrative. They're not explicitly blamed for the parent's unfulfilled potential, but the story is told often enough that they feel the implication. When substance dependence is involved with this type, the impulsiveness and the physical energy that already characterize this parent style becomes genuinely dangerous. The risk-taking gets bigger. The mood swings become more extreme. And the child, who had already learned to read the parent's physical cues, their body language, their tone of voice, their level of energy in a given moment, now has to do that work in conditions that are even less predictable. The adaptation required is enormous and exhausting. Let me talk about what children of this type of parent tend to carry into adulthood. They're often outwardly capable and resilient. They grew up in an environment that rewarded toughness, adaptability, and the ability to perform under pressure. And they developed real versions of those qualities. They can handle change. They can move fast when they need to. They know how to present themselves in social situations. But they also often carry a specific kind of difficulty around stillness, around rest, around just existing without producing something that can be evaluated or admired. Because in their childhood home, worth was almost entirely tied to visible performance. And the internal message they absorbed is that they need to be doing something impressive to be worth paying attention to. They frequently struggle with emotional depth in relationships. Not because they don't have feelings, but because feelings, particularly vulnerability, were treated as weakness in their home. They learn to push emotion down, to convert it into action or humor or some other more socially acceptable form. In adult relationships, when genuine emotional intimacy is required, they can find themselves genuinely not knowing how to get there. Many children of ESTP narcissistic parents also develop a complicated relationship with charm. Because they grew up with a parent whose charm was real but also a tool, they learned early that likability and trustworthiness aren't the same thing. That someone can be exciting and engaging and still be fundamentally unsafe. And that awareness, while useful, can make it hard to fully trust people who are genuinely warm and appealing. There's always a part of them waiting for the charm to drop and something more controlling to emerge. Before I close, I want to say something directly. If the parent I've described today sounds familiar, and if you grew up in an environment where you had to be impressive to be loved, where vulnerability was mocked, and where the excitement of life was real but never quite stable, your experience was real. The fun moments were real too. Both things existed. And you're allowed to acknowledge what was genuinely good while also being honest about what cost you something. You don't have to decide your parent was entirely wrong to recognize that some of what happened wasn't okay. Both truths can exist at the same time. Before I go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you had someone in your life whose public personality and private behavior were very different from each other? And how did you eventually make sense of that gap? Drop it in the comments if you're comfortable sharing. These are the conversations I think matter most, and your experience is genuinely worth putting into words. Thanks for watching. If this video resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I want to be upfront and share that I use this text-to-speech voice to tell my stories because, as a full-time ESL teacher, I have to be very careful with my vocal cords. Managing vocal nodules means I have to save my voice for my students, but I didn't want that to stop me from sharing these unfiltered thoughts with you. I'm Jhonna, and I'm currently working toward my goal of 1,000 subscribers so I can finally monetize this channel and turn this passion into a sustainable part of my future. This is my diary of solo living here in the Philippines, and your support, whether through a comment or a sub, helps me keep this channel growing. If you would like to help out even more, you can check out the Buy a Treat for My Pets link in the description. My dogs definitely appreciate the love. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next update. Thank you for being such an important part of this journey. I'm Jhonna, and I will see you in the next one.